I was wondering what would have happened to the band Rush if Neil Peart had never joined, because as I was researching the topic for the album Fly By Night, I noticed the original drummer left the band due to an illness, and the band really didn't want to let him go. So it was almost like these unforeseen circumstances that brought Neil Peart into the band. So it makes me wonder, would they had just been this lesser known Canadian rock band, something like Five Man Electrical Band, instead of being the big classic rock band that they are today? That's something to wonder about, and just a way to introduce the topic, because I'm going to be telling the story of Fly By Night and how Neil Peart influenced the album and how it began to change their direction. I will be discussing everything from the music to the lyrics to the story behind the album, so let me get into it.
Hello, my name is Sidney Fife, and this is my man, Peter Clavin.
Hello.
And we're just the biggest Rush fans in the history of the planet Earth.
The biggest, right.
Again.
The story begins in March of 1974. Rush are getting ready to release the follow-up to their self-titled debut album. At this point in the band's career, it was their second lineup, which consisted of Alex Lifeson, Geddy Lee, and the drummer I just mentioned. His name is John Rutsey. He got very sick because he had diabetes and he had to leave the band. But in the meantime, they found a temporary replacement. His name was Jerry Fielding. But John Rutsey attempted to come back, but Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson decided it was too complicated with his health problems, and they had to let him go. They didn't want to let him go. It was just something they had to do given the circumstances. Plus the fact John Rutsey didn't really like touring. I wonder how he felt seeing this band get big after he left, though. It must have been frustrating because I'm sure he wanted to stay, but he just couldn't. I did some research and I wanted to see what he was doing afterwards. And I found he became a bodybuilder for a few years afterwards, and he died in 2008 from a diabetes-related heart attack. So when you think about it, I guess he had a few years doing something different, but still his life was cut short due to the illness. So let me get back to the story of Rush. So at this point in the story, Rush decides to hold auditions. They auditioned 5 drummers. The fourth of those 5 drummers was Neil Peart from a local band, which was named J.R. Flood. And the first song they played to was Anthem, which was written while John Rutsey was still in the group. That's also the first song on the album. I'll talk about that in a minute. Later I'll talk about how Neil Peart writes the lyrics and names the song, but that's just the song they played. So at this point, they decide that Neil Peart is their official drummer. He joined on July 29, 1974. It was also Geddy Lee's 21st birthday, and right before the band kicked off their U.S. tour in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, opening for Uriah Heep and Manfred Mann's Earth Band. Now it's time to record the album. They recorded it during the last week of December 1974, mixed in early of January 1975 at Toronto Sound Studios while they had a short break in touring. It took about 5 days to record. Once they finished the mixing, the group traveled to Winnipeg to start their Fly By Night tour. This is also the band's first album, co-produced by Terry Brown, who would be with the band from this album up until Signals from 1982. And this album also marks a change in their sound because we see some longer songs. We hear more of their progressive rock sounds, but there are still parts of the album that sound more like their first album, which had more of this Led Zeppelin-esque type of sound. So I want to talk about the lyrics because I feel they are an important aspect of this band's history. As we know, Neil Peart was not the only drummer, but he was the primary lyricist. So he wrote most of the lyrics on this album, the exception being 2 songs written by Geddy Lee, which were Best I Can and In the End, and I'll talk about them later. The first track on side 1 is Anthem, and Neil Peart wrote the lyrics. He named the song after this dystopian novella by the Russian-American writer and philosopher Ayn Rand, and the book is also called Anthem. Ayn Rand would also be an inspiration for the 2112 album. But if you look at the lyrics, they seem to be very uplifting. For example, there's one line that says, "Live for yourself, there's no one else worth living for." So it's something that was very interesting. After this was a song written by Geddy Lee called Best I Can. The song doesn't have any deep lyrical meaning or anything like that. Basically a song about saying I'm going to live my life the way I want to, and while I'm at it, I'll do the best I can. That's basically what it's about. Beneath, between, and behind was written by Neil Peart and has the music written by Alex Lifeson. This is actually the first song with lyrics written by Neil Peart. And what makes it unique is that he wrote the lyrics before Geddy and Alex wrote the music, which was usually the other way around. The song tells a story about the discovery of America and everything that happened, including immigration and wars and everything else. So a pretty cool lyrical content. Next song is one of the most important ones on the album. It's called By-Tor and the Snow Dog. It's important because it's the first song of theirs that's the longer song divided into several sections, which is something this band would be doing a lot on subsequent albums. The original concept was inspired by two dogs owned by Rush's manager Ray Daniels, whose names were By-Tor and Snow Dog, and they just changed the spelling. So what Neil Peart did was he took the idea of these two dogs, they created this good versus evil fantasy about them. According to the band, they were just joking around one day. They said they were getting high when they came up with the idea about the two dogs, but Neil went ahead and he wrote a song about it. There are 4 tracks on side 2. First track is called Fly By Night, or the title track. Music written by Geddy Lee, lyrics written by Neil Peart. The song was inspired by Neil Peart's first time he left his hometown, when he left Canada to go to England, and he was only 18 years old. It's also the first time the band released one of their singles outside the US and Canada. It was released in the Netherlands as well as Australia. After this is the track Making Memories. The song was inspired by being on the road. Just basically stories about touring from place to place. It was inspired by a wrong turn that they took, and it took them off the path for a few hours. It's a positive song. They highlight a lot of the good things that can happen while on the road. Then there's the track Rivendell, inspired by The Lord of the Rings. What's interesting is I recently did a video about Black Sabbath on their first album, writing about Lord of the Rings, and we all know Led Zeppelin have done it, and there's this black metal band named Rivendell. So that's based on this one, which is this place in the Lord of the Rings universe, this fictional place. And the lyrics basically describe everything about it. Final song is called In the End. This is the other song where Geddy Lee wrote the lyrics and not Neil Peart. Basically a love song, something Rush didn't do very often, but just one of those examples. Now those are the lyrics, so I want to talk about the music. So I'm going to go track by track again, because on this album we see him moving towards a progressive rock direction, but it still has that classic blues rock sound that was apparent on the first album. So a lot of songs sound like the first album, but there's a little bit of progginess that will be coming. So pretty much the opening track, Anthem, I thought it was more of the more progressive rock sounding tracks with an odd time signature riff in the beginning. It goes into more classic metal sound. It's one of the heavier ones. I know there's some metal bands covered the song. Anthrax did it on one of their covers EPs. Geddy Lee does these high-pitched vocals on this track, and basically most of the album in general. You can hear the difference in the drumming, as Neil Peart had his own style he developed, and Alex Lifeson has a pretty cool guitar solo. Next song is Best I Can. This one definitely has a sound closest to the first album. It's a classic hard rock song with a lot of energy. I've always thought it was a good song. Best parts being the guitar solo and the drumming. Beneath, Between, and Behind reminds me a lot of Led Zeppelin. Whenever I hear the song, I hear the main riff, I think of a Led Zeppelin song. I can't remember which one, but it just reminds me of something I've heard before. It's another one. It's similar to the first album, and my favorite part is that chromatic guitar riff in the middle of the song. Then at the end of side 1, we get to By-Tor and the Snow Dog, and this is their big prog song I was talking about. At first, it sounds like classic rock and roll. It's very upbeat and tells the story of the main characters. And you hear more of that progressive rock sound after about a minute and a half, and they go into these trippy sounds with a distorted bass guitar, accompanied by these spacey guitar riffs. And this section is very trippy. After about 3 minutes, you hear a memorable guitar riff, and that serves as the transition. And then Neil Peart has some cool short drum solos. Then after about 4 minutes, 45 seconds, it goes into this quiet part where you barely hear anything. Then about 6.5 minutes in, you hear the guitar solo, and the last minute goes back to that main rock and roll melody. And I think the song, it's about 8 minutes long in full. And then the next song is the title track. This is the first track on side 2. I've always liked this one. It's a straightforward classic rock song. Not really much of a progressive rock song, but it's very catchy. It has that type of chorus that will stick in your head. Probably the most memorable one. Then we have Making Memories, another one that reminds me of Led Zeppelin, with the acoustic guitar strumming in the beginning. Similar to Queen's Crazy Little Things Called Love, but That one came out 5 years later than this one. But the guitar solo is really good, and Alex Lifeson plays this bluesy guitar using the slide guitar. Then there's Rivendell, and this is interesting. It's basically Geddy Lee and an acoustic guitar. It's a soft and quiet song. There's no drums, but Neil Peart wrote the lyrics, so you could tell he was a part of it. To be honest, not one of my favorites, but I can respect it. The final song is In the End. Another one that's kind of quiet. The second side of the album is basically very chill. I think like the first side is like the harder rocker, and then the second side is pretty laid back. But the song picks up after about 2 minutes. It has that classic rock sound of the 70s. Pretty straightforward. It's not very complex. It's just a typical classic rock type of song. So let me know what you think of Fly By Night. In the meantime, check out this review I did of 2112. That was the next album. It celebrated an anniversary about 4 years ago, so it's an older video. Check it out anyways. Thanks for watching. Please give the video a like. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you have not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.